So this is what was happening to me. I was experiencing vaginismus, and it felt good to know that it had a name to it.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, okay, if this is what I'm going through, surely there must be a way to treat it. There must be a way to overcome it. And that really came from starting the journey of educating myself about sex. I didn't realize that was what I was doing, but that's really where my journey towards sex education for myself started. Vaginismus is a condition in which a woman's pelvic floor muscles, so the pelvic floor muscles are the muscles that surround your vagina. So in vaginismus, the pelvic floor muscles contract automatically, involuntarily. And when those pelvic floor muscles contract, it makes the vagina really narrow. I didn't know that that was happening to me until I read about vaginismus. And you can imagine if the vagina is becoming narrow, now if something's trying to go in, such as during penetrative sex, it's going to be painful and difficult. There's going to be that friction due to the narrowing of the vagina from those pelvic floor muscles contracting. So this is what was happening to me. I was experiencing vaginismus, and it felt good to know that it had a name to it.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, okay, if this is what I'm going through, surely there must be a way to treat it. There must be a way to overcome it. And that really came from starting the journey of educating myself about sex. I didn't realize that was what I was doing, but that's really where my journey towards sex education for myself started. Is I had to educate myself about my own body, about my female sexual anatomy. I had to educate myself about, how do I now get these muscles to relax? If the issue is that they're contracting on their own, how do I consciously get them to be relaxed so that my vagina is nice and wide and open for pain-free penetration? And so I took that journey. I eventually was able to overcome it. I was eventually able to have pain-free sex with my husband truly for the first time. So I'm saying that because
How long after was that? How long after your wedding?
subhanAllah, it literally took me about 4 or 5 weeks to
Oh,
overcome
okay.
it, which is a short amount of time. For most women, it takes a bit longer. But for me, it was like, it just was like that. I don't know how to describe it. It was like the initial education. So actually, I say 4 or 5 weeks, but maybe it was longer actually. It was 4 or 5 weeks once I bought myself a set of tools. They're known as dilators. They're essentially like tampons, but they come from like really small sizes and then they kind of gradually increase. It was from the moment I ordered those dilators and received the dilators and started using them. From then, it's when it took me 4 to 5 weeks.
Okay. And how
But
long after your marriage was that? So how many
that was
years were
more than a
you?
year later, more than a year. So at least a year and a half after my marriage. Um, so I was then, I treated myself. And that treatment wasn't just physical treatment using the dilators. That was one part of it. But it was also, I didn't realize I was doing this, but I was also healing myself mentally from those fears and those myths that I believed about sex. And I was then able to finally have true first time sex in a completely pain-free way. And why I say true first time is because the previous times when I tried to have first time sex, when they were painful, I don't see it as my true first time. I saw it as kind of like something that I wasn't meant to experience. I wasn't meant to experience painful first time sex, but I did. And it was painful because of the lack of education. And so once I had the right education and I treated myself, and my husband's penis was finally able to fully go in my vagina, and I saw for myself, wow, there is no pain. I take that as my true first time. And that is what I want for every single woman, is to, if they're not married, to go into a marriage with the right education about her body, knowing how to relax her pelvic floor muscles and experience true pain-free first time sex. And when I eventually told my family about it, and so I didn't tell them initially, I told them many years later. I told my siblings initially before my parents. When I told them, and I remember I was telling them because it was one of my younger sisters. She was about to be married, and for some reason, one of them asked me, "What was your first time like?" And I said to one of my siblings, "I couldn't have sex on my wedding night," and they were shocked. They were like, "What? Like, what do you mean you couldn't have sex?" And I was like, "It was too
They got
painful."
no
I guess.
idea.
No, exactly.
They got no idea.
I said, look, it couldn't happen. It was too painful. And I went through this condition called vaginismus, and I explained it to them, and they were surprised. And actually they were shocked. They were like, why didn't you tell us? We would have, helped you, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would have been
Like,
shocked too.
yeah,
A
exactly.
year and a half of nothing, just pretending like everything is, yep, everything's fine, everything's normal. So
Yeah.
your mom never asked you, your aunties never never asked you
No.
after the fact, how was it? Are you okay? Or anything like that?
No, they didn't. Yeah, no, they didn't. And I don't blame them for that. My mum was raised, you know, she grew up in Thailand, and, you know, I suppose even in Thailand, she wasn't raised Muslim, but she is now, alhamdulillah. Even in Thailand, I don't think it's a topic that you discuss, you know, talking about sex. And the same with my dad. He grew up in Egypt. You know, he never spoke to me about it
No,
at
your dad's
all.
not going to ask you. That's
No,
that's a
exactly.
given. Your dad's not
Exactly.
going to say
So
anything.
no, neither of my parents or family members or anyone asked me initially. I think they just assumed that it would all be fine. I think they just assumed that I was no longer a virgin. I think that was the assumption that they made, but they didn't ask me how it was. But yeah, no, alhamdulillah. And so I think what the point I was trying to make through sharing this whole story is that there is so much expectation on Muslim couples to do it on their first night, to have sex for the first time on that night. And of course you can, it's now halal for you to have sex, but only do it, only engage in your first sexual experience with your new spouse if both of you are ready mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And if one or both of you are not, work together. You're now in this marriage, you're now a team. Work together to raise each other up, to get to that same point where you're both on the same page, because that is going to be a much more pleasant, pleasurable, enjoyable, intimate experience when you do engage in it. And it will be so much more worth it, inshallah, rather than going through the frustration and disappointment of your first time because of the lack of education and the lack of teamwork. It's bring each other to the same page.